My name is Teresa Holloway. I'm 68 years old. I was once a school librarian in Ashland, Oregon. I raised a son. I buried a husband. And I kept more secrets than a woman ever should. Today is my birthday, but the house is quiet. No phone calls, no visits. Not even a knock on the door pretending to be a delivery that never came. Instead, I saw them on Instagram. My son Ethan, his wife Lila, laughing under a beach umbrella in Santa Barbara. Captioned, "Celebrating our miracle. Baby H coming soon." They left town this morning. I stayed behind, alone. The air smells faintly of chocolate. I baked the cake last night. His favorite, double fudge, extra moist, just like when he was 12. I set out 2 plates. Then I set one aside. Now the frosting has started to harden. The tea has gone lukewarm. I don't cry. I haven't cried in years. Not since the day a doctor handed me a folder and said gently, "You should be prepared. Your son may never have children." Ethan was 8. He just recovered from mumps. I kept the record, slid it into a manila envelope, hid it in a box with his baby teeth, his finger paintings, and the ticket from our first trip to the zoo. I never told him. Never told his father either. I thought, maybe miracles happen. Maybe love was enough. Maybe some things a mother just carries quietly. But now watching Lila kiss her flat stomach in a photo shoot titled, "Our Journey Begins," I realized something else. Maybe silence lets the wrong people write the story. I take the envelope out of the box. It still smells faintly of the cedar chest I kept it in. I place it gently on the kitchen table next to the cake, next to the forgotten teacup. Then I slip on my gloves, step out into the garden. The lavender is blooming earlier than usual. I pull out the hose, start watering the far corner where Ethan once built a fort from tomato cages and a blue tarp. The sun is soft on my shoulders. I don't feel bitter. Not really. Just anchored. In a kind of truth I no longer want to protect. They called it a miracle. But I know better. And I'm done pretending I don't. It started when Ethan was 8. A winter flu turned into something more. His glands swelled. His fever wouldn't break. The doctor called it mumps. But the word didn't mean much to me then. Not until the specialist leaned forward days later and said, "There's a possibility his reproductive system was affected. Long-term consequences. Infertility, mostly." I remember staring at the floor of that examination room, blue tile chipped near the corner. The fluorescent lights flickered. Ethan was outside in the waiting room eating a grape popsicle. And I thought, he's just a boy who loves frogs and tree houses and thinks babies come from storks. He doesn't need to know this. Not now. Maybe not ever. So I said, "Thank you." I folded the paper once, then twice, then again, and I never showed it to anyone. Not his father. Henry, who would have panicked, called every doctor in Oregon, demanded second and third opinions. Not Ethan himself. I put it in the cedar box, the one where I kept his baby items, tiny socks, finger paintings, the blue hat from the hospital. That paper joined them like another relic of childhood I didn't know what to do with. Love, I believed then, was knowing when not to speak. It was my job to hold his fears so he could run free, to carry his truth so he wouldn't have to. Years passed. He grew, healthy, bright, funny. No signs of lingering illness. He joined track in high school, played trumpet in the jazz band. Never once did I hear him complain about that part of himself. So I buried it deeper. When Henry died, heart attack sudden like a flame gone out, I wanted to tell someone, just to say it out loud. But by then, Ethan was 22, And I thought, what good would it do now? I kept the box tucked on the highest shelf in the linen closet. Once a year, usually around his birthday, I'd open it, just to check. The paper was always there, yellowing slightly at the corners, still folded neatly, still waiting. I watched Ethan fall in love. At first with books. He majored in literature, read everything from Steinbeck to Murakami. Then with ideas. He wanted to teach change minds. And then, Lila. She had a laugh like clinking glass, and eyes that held just enough sadness to be intriguing. I wasn't sure about her. Still, I smiled. I hosted brunch. I passed down Henry's lemon pancake recipe. When they announced their engagement, I sewed pearls onto her veil myself. She called me T, never Mom, never Teresa. Just T. Like I was the family dog. Welcome, but not essential. And still I smiled. Because I told myself love is letting go. Let them find their rhythm. Let them grow their roots. But there were moments. Tiny things. Like how she once moved Ethan's framed baby photo from the mantel to the guest room because it clashed with the new decor. Or how she'd correct him when he used words like sentimental or nostalgic. She wanted a husband who looked forward, not one who looked back. And Ethan, he dimmed himself for her. Stopped talking about his poetry. Started quoting stock prices. One night, I stayed late after dinner. She cleared the dishes. He walked me to my car, and I said, as softly as I could, "You okay, honey?" He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. I almost told him then. Almost said, "You know, years ago, there was something about your health," but I swallowed it. Again. Because I'd carried that truth so long, it felt like a bone in my body. Fixed. Unmovable. Now sitting at my kitchen table with that same paper unfolded before me, I wonder if I mistook protection for denial. If by hiding his story, I helped someone else write a lie. Because miracles don't grow from lies. They rot from them. And some things a mother carries too long until they no longer serve love, but silence. And silence, I've learned, has teeth. After the wedding, it began with the little things. Things small enough that I almost convinced myself they weren't happening. Ethan used to call every Sunday morning. No matter what. He'd say, "Hey Ma, I'm making pancakes. Want to hear something weird I read in the Atlantic?" And I'd sit on my porch with my tea, listening to him ramble about essays and theories and things that made no difference to my world, but every difference to his. The first Sunday after they returned from their honeymoon, there was no call. I waited until noon, then 3 p.m. Nothing. The next Sunday, I got a text. "Busy today. Lila and I are reorganizing the kitchen. Talk soon." That soon turned into a week, then 2. I told myself they're newlyweds. Let them settle. Love is letting go. Love is being invisible when needed. But it didn't stop there. One weekend, I dropped off a casserole, my mother's chicken, and wild rice, Ethan's favorite since college. I left it in a container with a note. For a cozy evening. Love, Mom. It came back in a plastic bag 3 days later. Still full. Unopened. Not even a spoonful missing. The note wasn't returned. Next was the birthday dinner, Ethan's not mine. They held it at some modern place downtown with neon signs and deconstructed dishes I couldn't pronounce. I was invited technically, seated at the far end of a long table between Lila's coworker and someone's Pilates instructor. Ethan raised a toast. He thanked Lila for planning everything, thanked his friends for coming, thanked the bartender for knowing exactly how I like my bourbon. He didn't mention me. Not once. And yet I smiled, because if I didn't smile, I feared the crack would show, and once it showed, it would spread. Later that night, I drove home in silence. I unpinned the brooch I wore Henry's last anniversary gift to me and placed it back in its box. The box felt heavier than usual. One Tuesday, I called just to say hello. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text arrived. In a meeting. Everything okay? I replied. Just wanted to hear your voice. No response. By the end of that month, I'd stopped initiating. The silence became a third member at my dinner table. It sat beside me during game shows. It poured itself coffee in the morning. I named it Space, because calling it rejection hurt too much. I started keeping a journal again. I hadn't done that in years. I'd write down small things: how many birds came to the feeder, which neighbor waved, what the grocery clerk said about the rain. But often I'd find myself writing sentences like Lila posted a story of Ethan in the backyard. The tulips I planted 5 years ago are still blooming. Or, today, they hosted brunch. I saw in the background the watercolor I gifted him for graduation, now framed sideways. I became a shadow in their lives. Not a mother, not even a memory, just an outdated page no one bothered to turn. There was one time Thanksgiving. They sent me a photo, a beautifully set table with gold-trimmed plates and cloth napkins. Ethan wrote, "Hope you're having a restful day, Ma." Lila says hi. I stared at the screen, then glanced at my own table. A reheated turkey sandwich, 1 slice of pumpkin pie from the freezer. The candles I'd lit burned quietly, untouched. I deleted the photo. They say grief doesn't always come in loud moments like funerals or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes in lowercase, in things unsaid, in empty chairs, in side eyes and shrugged shoulders. And slowly I realized I was no longer Teresa, the woman who raised him. I was T, the accessory, the pleasant afterthought, the woman you thank in a caption but don't actually call. That's when I stopped bringing food, stopped waiting for Sunday calls, stopped pretending I didn't feel the cold. Because there's a kind of forgetting that's worse than absence. It's the forgetting where you're still there, but no one bothers to see you. I remember the day so clearly. It was a Thursday in late October, brisk outside, but still golden with sunlight. Ethan had promised to stop by for dinner. "We'll swing by around 6, Ma. Lila's craving your beef stew. We've both had a week." My heart skipped when I heard it. He didn't just say he'd come. He said we. He said craving. He said Ma. So I spent all of Wednesday evening prepping. Carrots peeled and sliced on a diagonal, the way he liked them, like little orange smiles. Beef cubes marinated overnight in rosemary thyme, and red wine, just like Henry used to do. I even pulled out the old Dutch oven, the one with the small crack along the handle. Ethan once called it the magic pot. Said it turned food into hugs. I ironed the table runner, set the plates with cloth napkins. Even lit 2 candles just for ambiance, I told myself. And then, without thinking, I added a 3rd plate. Old habit, maybe. Or hope. I wore a soft blue cardigan, the one Ethan had given me 5 Christmases ago, before Lila. It smelled faintly of cedar and a little like thyme. By 5:40, the stew had filled the house with its familiar, rich scent. I opened the window slightly, just in case they arrived early and could smell it from the driveway. By 6:15, I refreshed the salad, added a dash more lemon. By 6:30, I checked my phone. Nothing. At 6:42, a text came in. From Ethan. "Hey Ma, so sorry. Lila's not feeling great tonight. We're gonna stay in." Rain check. There was no rain, not a cloud in the sky. And she had posted an hour ago a photo of her nails. Self-care before the weekend, I stared at the screen, then turned it face down. I didn't cry. I just stood there listening to the tick of the wall clock. The stew was still warm, still perfect, still untouched. I set the phone aside and poured 3 bowls. One for Ethan, one for Lila, one for me. Then I sat at the head of the table and looked across at the empty chairs. I took a bite. It tasted like every memory I was trying not to remember. In the corner of the room, the candlelight flickered. The shadows danced across the wallpaper ivy leaves Henry had helped me paste up 30 years ago. Back when this room was full of laughter, the scraping of chairs, the clink of glasses. I imagined them arriving late, laughing, kissing my cheek. I imagined setting down the ladle, embracing my boy, hearing him say, "Smells like home." But all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator, the low thrum of something forgotten. After a few bites, I stopped eating. I couldn't taste it anymore. I stood up, gathered the bowls, and placed foil over the untouched portions. Carefully, methodically, as if preserving the dignity of a meal that no longer had an audience. I left Ethan's bowl on the table. It sat there for hours, cooling beside the untouched spoon, a silent monument to absence. At around 10, I walked to the sink and washed the dishes. My hands moved automatically, tracing patterns of routine etched over decades. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat on the back porch, in silence, wrapped in a throw blanket, watching the moon climb higher behind the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed. Its whistle stretched across the sky like a sigh too big for words. I thought about how love shrinks, how it moves from a full table to a third plate, to none. How a woman can spend 30 years making a house into a home, and then one day find herself cooking for shadows. I looked at the plate again through the glass window, and I whispered, not bitter, not broken, just a fact I used to matter here. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed with the smell of rosemary still clinging to my sleeves. The next morning, the kitchen still smelled faintly of rosemary and red wine. I stood there staring at the cake I had bought for myself, a small chocolate ganache, the kind with the thin layer of raspberry in the middle. 68 candles felt unnecessary. I only placed one, just one. To mark that, I was still here. No one called that morning. No knock on the door. No card slipped under the mat. I brewed a cup of tea and sat at the table. The third plate had been cleared away the night before, but its ghost still hovered in the air. It was supposed to be a quiet morning, a slow return to calm. But then my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Hey, Ma. Sorry we missed dinner. Crazy timing, but we got some good news. Lila's pregnant." My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't type anything. Didn't need to. Instead, I opened the browser. It was a small impulse, one of those you don't think about until you've done it. I clicked on Lila's Instagram, and there it was. A photo of her in their backyard. Sunlight behind her, cupping her belly gently with both hands. Wearing a soft cream dress, barefoot in the grass. Caption, "Miracle coming soon. We're over the moon. Rough 12 weeks. Baby Smith. Blessed." My throat tightened. I wasn't angry, not even sad at first. It was something quieter than grief, like being erased in real time. The photo had over 300 likes already. Comments flooded with, "So happy for you guys, and you'll be the best mom." One from her sister. "Our little angel already so loved." I closed the app, set the phone down, and turned my head slowly toward the chocolate cake. It was still sitting there on the counter untouched, the single candle now slightly tilted, like it had slouched from waiting too long to be lit. I walked over, sat down, and stared at it, not because I wanted to eat it, not because it was my birthday, but because that cake had become a mirror. It reflected back everything I didn't want to say out loud. The silence in the house, the flicker of disappointment that had grown too comfortable, the slow, polite fade out from a story I once helped write. I remembered how Ethan used to shout Mom from the front porch, coming home from school with scraped knees. I remembered his 5th birthday when he begged me to make 2 cakes, one chocolate, one vanilla, because he couldn't choose. And I made both. Of course I did. And now here I was, 68, alone, reading about my grandchild through hashtags. A miracle. That's what they called it. But to me, it was something else. It was a line in the sand, a final stamp that said, "You're no longer needed here." Because if they really thought of me, really wanted to share joy, they would have come, or called, or remembered. Instead, they gave me a text and a filtered photo, and I gave them everything. I had carried Ethan through fever nights, held his hand during hospital visits, covered his tuition when Henry's insurance fell short. I carried the weight of his infertility diagnosis alone, locked away in a folder for over 20 years. Because I loved him, because I thought shielding him was the way a mother shows up. And now, the child who once asked me if broken bones healed faster with love, forgot my birthday and called someone else's womb a miracle. I lit the candle, just to see it burn. The flame flickered soft and short-lived. I watched the wax drip down one side. Then quietly, I blew it out. The room smelled briefly of sweetness and smoke, like something had ended, but not loudly, just finely. I cut a slice, small, and placed it on a plate with a silver fork. Then I walked it to the counter beside the mail pile, set it there like an offering no one would take, and went out to water my garden. That afternoon, I took my garden gloves off and leaned against the porch rail, a soft ache blooming in my shoulders. The roses looked well watered. The herbs were holding on. And I was still breathing. Across the street, Lena sat on her little patio, peeling apples with a knife so thin and worn it looked like a silver whisper. Her hands moved slow, deliberate, with the kind of grace that only comes from doing something for too many years. A bowl of peels gathered in her lap like soft orange ribbons. She looked up, gave me the smallest nod. I walked over. Lena didn't ask questions. She never did. Not even when my husband died. Not even when Ethan left for college and I cried on her porch for 2 hours barely speaking. That's the thing about women like Lena. They don't press. They wait. I sat down on the wicker chair next to her, the one with the faded cushion that smelled faintly of basil and dust. We listened to the wind for a while. Birds trilled somewhere in the distance. A squirrel darted up her oak tree. Finally, I said, "They're having a baby." She didn't flinch, just nodded once, like she already knew. I added, "They found out last week, took a trip to Charleston to celebrate. Left the day before my birthday." Another nod. Another apple slice dropped into the bowl. "It's a miracle, apparently," I said. My voice cracked a little, not from pain, but from the effort of sounding neutral. Lena glanced at me, then back at the apple in her hand. "They always say that," she said softly. "Miracle. Like joy is only real when it comes with a hashtag." I almost smiled. Then I whispered, Am I being petty? She stopped slicing, wiped her hands on her apron. I continued. I keep thinking I should be happy for them. I mean, it's good news, right? But there's this part of me deep down that feels pushed out, like they're building something new, and there's no room for what came before. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, after my daughter got married, she moved to Seattle, sent postcards for a year, then stopped. I looked at her. She wasn't crying. Her voice didn't tremble, but there was something in her eyes. She went on. At first, I told myself she was busy, that it was a good sign her having her own life. But then I started realizing I was doing all the remembering, all the calling, all the sending. And when I stopped, so did everything. I didn't know what to say, but that's when it hit me. She wasn't telling me what to feel. She was showing me where I stood. I whispered, I kept a medical file hidden for 20 years. Ethan got sick when he was 8 months, severe complications. Doctor said he'd probably never be able to father a child. I never told him, never told Henry either. I just filed it away. Prayed it was wrong. Lena's gaze softened. You were protecting him. I nodded. Or maybe I was afraid that if he knew he'd feel broken, like he didn't deserve love. Lena peeled another apple slice. Then after a pause, she said, funny, isn't it? How we spend our lives trying to spare them from pain and somehow end up swallowing it ourselves. That line stayed with me, like a stone settling deep in my chest. She didn't judge me, didn't offer solutions, just sat beside me. Let me be angry and small and confused without making me feel like I had to rise above it. I looked down at my hands. So many years of cooking, folding, washing, holding. Hands that once braided Ethan's hair when he cried over bullies. Hands that never let go even when he did. Do you think I'm bitter? I asked. She shrugged. I think you're tired. And there it was. Not condemnation, not absolution, just truth. I stood up, brushing off my skirt. Thanks, Lena. She nodded again, eyes crinkling slightly. Next time, bring tea. As I walked back home, I realized something simple, almost laughably obvious. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't spiteful. I was grieving. Not the baby. Not even Ethan. But the version of me who thought love was always enough. The next morning, the sky was overcast, as if even the sun had grown tired of trying. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a warm cup of Earl Grey cradled between my hands when the phone rang. The screen flashed Lila. I hadn't spoken to her directly in weeks. Most things came through Ethan. Even then, barely a line or two. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Hi, Teresa, she said, her voice as brisk as a nurse's during rounds. No hello. How are you? No sorry, we missed your birthday. Just those 3 clipped syllables, like she was checking something off a list. We're at the airport, she continued. Just boarding. A beat. I waited. Not because I had anything to say, but because I wanted to see if she remembered I existed beyond utility. Nothing. Then she said it. I think we forgot to arrange for someone to feed Pepper. Could you swing by and check on him? Just once. He gets nervous when he's alone. It wasn't a question. It was an assignment. A quiet expectation slipped under the door like a bill. I swallowed. Sure, thanks. The spare keys still under the flower pot. Oh, and please don't leave the lights on this time. Ethan said it ran the electric a bit high. Before I could respond, the line went dead. No, thank you. No, take care. Just the sound of her boarding pass being scanned into a new life, one that didn't need me in it. I sat there, phone still in hand. The tea had gone lukewarm, and something inside me hardened, not in a dramatic, angry way. I didn't slam my fist on the table or cry into the floral cushion. No, it was colder than that. Quieter. Like the first morning you realize winter has arrived not because of a storm, but because your breath fogs up the window when you didn't expect it to. I stood up, grabbed my coat from the hallway, reached for my gardening gloves out of habit more than need. On the way out, I passed the small table by the stairs where I kept my late husband's watch and Ethan's baby photo. I paused, opened the drawer underneath, and there it was. The old, worn file with the words, confidential, pediatric urology stamped across the front. The one I hadn't looked at in 2 decades. I touched the corner of it. Didn't pull it out. Not yet, but something in me whispered, soon. Outside, the wind had picked up. It ruffled the branches of the pear tree Ethan had planted when he was 16. He used to call it ours. Said it would bear fruit by the time he had a family of his own. I unlocked my car and drove in silence. No music, just the soft hum of tires on pavement and the occasional squawk of a jay overhead. Their house looked the same. The lawn was manicured, the porch clean. The mailbox still held a red ribbon from their wedding, now faded to rust. I bent down, retrieved the key from under the flower pot, and let myself in. Pepper barked once, then wagged his tail and licked my ankle. I crouched beside him. "Hello, old boy. Still remember me?" He licked my wrist in reply. I fed him, filled his bowl with fresh water, and walked through the living room like a ghost passing through walls. Everything was tidy. Too tidy. No family photos, just trendy frames with quotes like, live, laugh, love. I reached the kitchen and saw the note on the fridge. Remember prenatal vitamins. Call Dr. Mills. Confirm dinner res at water's edge. The handwriting was Lila's. Neat, planned, performative. I glanced at the fridge magnets. No photo of Ethan as a baby, no picture of their wedding, no holiday postcards from me. Just a smiling ultrasound image stuck with a magnet that read, Blessed. I turned back toward the front door, but before I left, I looked once more at the house. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel small. I felt like an archive, a collection of truths no one bothered to open. But that was about to change. I shut the door behind me, locked it with care, and slipped the key back under the flower pot. When I returned home, I walked straight to the drawer, pulled out the file, set it down on the kitchen table, and made myself another cup of tea. The next day, I was out in the garden early. The sun hadn't yet made up its mind, peeking through clouds like it was unsure whether the world deserved its warmth. I'd just finished pruning the lavender bush when I saw a car slow down in front of my gate. A dark sedan. Not new, not flashy, just deliberate. The engine idled, then shut off. He stepped out. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, tall in a plain gray button-down and slacks that hadn't been ironed well, nervous hands, kind eyes. He didn't walk to the door. He stood at the gate like someone trained to wait for permission. I wiped my gloves on a towel, walked over, and gently opened the latch. "Can I help you?" I asked. He cleared his throat. I think you might be Teresa Holloway." I nodded slowly. "My name is Miles." He hesitated. I used to know Lila. A long time ago." There it was. He didn't say we dated. He didn't say we were together. Just used to know. A phrase people use when trying to cross a bridge they themselves burned. I stepped aside. Would you like some tea? His eyes flickered, grateful, startled. Yes, thank you. We sat on the porch, the same swing where I used to rock Ethan as a toddler. I poured 2 cups, set the tray down between us. He didn't touch his tea, just looked out at the garden for a moment, then said, "She told me she was pregnant, that it was Ethan's." My fingers stayed wrapped around my mug. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I believed her, he added softly, because I wanted to. I finally looked at him. He was still staring at the gardenias. Is it terrible, he whispered to hope that she was lying. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up, walked inside, opened the drawer, brought out the file, Ethan's old diagnosis. Still creased, still marked confidential. I set it on the table beside the tea tray. Miles looked down at it, then back at me. I didn't explain, didn't say a word. He reached for it slowly, like it might burn him. Opened it, read the first page. His lips parted just slightly, and I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not shock, not fear, grief, and something close to release. He closed the file, rested both hands on top of it. I didn't come to start anything, he said quietly. When I saw the announcement and the dates, and I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. I nodded. You're not. We sat in silence, not uncomfortable, not tense, just quiet. Then he asked, "Does Ethan know?" "No." Another pause. "Do you want him to?" I looked at the hummingbird feeder, swaying in the breeze. "I wanted him to have a life without limits," I said. Back then, he was just a boy. And that diagnosis, it would have shaped him before life even gave him a chance. Miles stared at me. "That's incredible. You carried that alone." I smiled, tired but without bitterness. "A mother's job," I said softly, "is often invisible." He nodded, then surprised me by saying, "You're a better parent than either of them will ever be." I looked at him surprised. He shrugged. I knew Lila could be selfish. But Ethan, I didn't expect him to disappear the way he has. My hands curled around my tea again. "We all disappear from people when we don't think they matter," I murmured. That silence hung again, thicker now. Miles stood, gently placed the file back down. "I won't say anything to anyone, but thank you for trusting me with this." "You didn't ask for proof," I said, watching him. "I didn't need it," he replied. "But you gave it anyway. That means more than you know." As he walked away, I realized something strange. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel angry. I felt released. The truth wasn't a sword. It was a key. I watched his car pull away, then picked up the file, returned it to the drawer. The truth had done what it needed to do, and now it could rest. I didn't call Ethan that night. Not even a text. Not because I didn't have things to say. God knows I did. But there's a difference between being unheard and knowing no one is truly listening. So I did the only thing I could do without losing myself. I placed the infertility record back inside its original folder, gently like folding an old photograph of a child who used to need me. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just sealed it in a plain manila envelope. No names, no labels, just truth. Tucked between the pages was a note. Not dramatic, not bitter. Just a line I'd copied from something Lena once said: "Truth does not raise its voice. It simply waits to be recognized." Then I walked into the kitchen, boiled water, picked out my favorite tea chamomile with honey. The one Ethan never liked said it tasted like flowers. the one I always made anyway. I poured a cup, sat down at the table where his high chair used to be back when he'd bang a plastic spoon and demand applesauce. Now, the silence wasn't new. It had just deepened. On the counter sat the same chocolate cake from my birthday, still covered, still untouched except for the single slice I'd allowed myself the night they left for their miracle vacation. That word again. Miracle. They used it so freely, posted it with emojis and glitter text. Miracle loading. Our answered prayer. I'd seen all the photos online. Palm trees, sunset dinners, Lila holding her stomach like a prop in a play where only she knew the script, and Ethan smiling like a man who never imagined life could look this good. But I knew what he didn't, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I picked up the envelope, ran my fingers along the sealed edge, then walked to the living room and placed it right on the coffee table, front and center, not hidden, not thrown in his face, just there. If he ever asked. If he ever came back truly back, open-eyed, open-hearted, he would see it. And if he never did, well, some truths don't need an audience. I returned to the kitchen, carried my tea out to the garden. The air was cooler now. The light had softened into that tender hour between dusk and regret. I knelt by the rose bush, the one Ethan and I had planted when he was 11, because he thought red roses were boring and insisted on white ones instead. It had bloomed late this year. Stubborn. Like me. I trimmed a browning leaf pinched off a faded bloom. And I breathed. There was peace in not forcing anything anymore. I didn't need to scream the truth. Didn't need a confrontation or a confession. I'd done my part. Held the silence. Held the secret. Held the line between love and letting go. And that I realized was power too. Real power isn't in being heard. It's in knowing when your silence says everything. I sipped my tea slowly. Listened to the wind move through the branches. Then I whispered, not to anyone, but maybe to the garden, or to the woman I used to be. I see you now. I remember you. And I'm not sorry. I heard their car door shut before I saw them. Then came the sound of laughter. Not the kind you hear when someone sees a loved one again after weeks away. No. The kind reserved for inside jokes, private victories, airport coffee mishaps. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and took one last look around the living room. The envelope was still there, perfectly centered on the coffee table. I hadn't touched it since placing it down. And now, neither had the dust. Ethan came in first suitcase wheels, thudding over the hardwood. His face was a shade darker from the sun, and there was a lightness to him that hadn't come from rest. It came from forgetting. "Mom," he said without hugging me. "We just dropped the bags. Thought we'd swing by, say hello." Say hello. No mention of a birthday missed. No cake. No flowers. Not even a belated card. I smiled. "Tea's on." Lila appeared behind him, one hand on her slightly rounded belly, the other clutching her phone. She didn't look up right away, busy scrolling, maybe posting. "Smells like vanilla," Ethan said, glancing toward the kitchen. "You baking something?" I nodded. "Just a butter cake. Your favorite." He blinked, as if the memory took a second to load. Right. From when I was a kid. Lila didn't sit. She hovered near the armchair, still tapping. I poured tea into the ceramic cups I only used for guests. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, just guests. No one said much. I offered them cake. Ethan took a slice, polite. Lila declined, still glued to her screen. I sat down last. And then I did it. No drama, no grand reveal, just motion. I reached forward, picked up the envelope, and slid it across the table toward Ethan. His brow furrowed. "What's this?" I didn't answer, just sipped my tea. He opened the flap, pulled out the folder. For a second, he didn't recognize it. Then I saw it. The moment the color drained from his face, he looked at me, confused, startled, almost betrayed. Lila's head snapped up. "Ethan." He didn't speak. He didn't have to. She reached across the table, snatched the paper from his hand like a reflex, scanned the top line, froze. Her jaw tensed. "Where did you get this?" I didn't answer that either, just looked at her kindly, almost gently, the way you look at someone who's painted themselves into a corner and is only just now realizing the paint's still wet. "This isn't recent," she snapped. "It's old. It's the truth," I said softly. Ethan turned to me, a dozen words behind his eyes, none of them ready to come out. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I set down my cup. "Because it wasn't mine to tell," I said. "Until now." He blinked. Now I nodded toward Lila's stomach. Because sometimes the people we trust with our dreams forget. The truth is still there, waiting. Lila stood up, fists clenched. "You had no right." I smiled, not cruelly, but the way a lighthouse holds steady when the storm forgets what mercy looks like. "I had every right," I replied, "to protect my son." The room went silent again, except this time it wasn't empty. It was filled with things no one had words for. I stood, walked over to the cake, cut a new slice, placed it on a fresh plate, then offered it to Ethan. His hands trembled slightly as he took it. Lila didn't sit back down. She walked toward the door phone, still in hand. Ethan looked between us, between his wife, his mother, and the paper on the table. No one moved to pick it up. No one needed to. I went to the garden after they left, poured the rest of the tea into the soil beneath the rosebush, then watered the garden. Because life in all its messy truths still grows. He didn't leave right away. After Lila stormed out, slamming the car door so hard the windows hummed, Ethan stayed behind, still seated, still holding the plate of butter cake half eaten. His eyes were on the table, not on me. "Mom." It was the way he said it, soft, like a boy who'd broken something and didn't yet know if it could be fixed. But it wasn't the word itself that ached. It was that I couldn't remember the last time it was spoken like that, as if it still meant something. I didn't know. He began, voice low. "I swear, Lila said it was a surprise. She told me she took a test after we got back from the doctor, and I didn't stop him. Didn't correct, didn't nod. I simply reached over and refilled his tea. His hands shook a little as he brought the cup to his lips. "I should have told you about the test," he said, "back when I was a kid. But Dad said not to talk about it, said it'd make me feel broken." I looked at him then, just looked. Not to shame, not to scold, but to remind him that silence is never the same as healing. "I forgot about it, Mom," he went on. "I buried it so deep. I honestly thought maybe there'd been a mistake. Maybe something changed." I folded the tea towel in my lap, smoothing out the corners. "That's the thing about the truth," I said finally. "It doesn't change. Only how long we pretend it might." He blinked. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. The word hovered in the air between us like a bird afraid to land. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. For your birthday. For dinners. For..." He trailed off, gesturing helplessly. "For remembering I offered." He nodded. His eyes were wet now, You didn't deserve any of this. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I rose from my chair, took the empty cake plate from his hand, and brought it to the sink. I rinsed it slowly, the water warm, the silence warmer. Then I spoke. I used to think love meant always saying yes, always understanding, always forgiving first. He watched me waiting. But now, I turned, drying my hands. Now I know love sometimes means stepping back so the people we raised can finally see us as human. He stood then. Can I give you a hug? His voice was tentative, small. And maybe it was the part of me that still remembered his childhood fever. His little hands clinging to mine, the way he used to cry out for me after nightmares. But I didn't move. I smiled gently and said I still have flowers to water. He froze, just long enough to know that this wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary, a soft one, but firm. I walked past him out through the back door into the garden. Behind me, the door stayed open a moment too long. Then I heard it close. Not with a bang, just a quiet click. I bent down by the lilies, fingers in the soil, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't wonder if he'd follow. I just breathed and let the silence be enough. The day after they left, I didn't cry. I trimmed the lavender, refilled the bird bath, dusted the shelves, and then I brewed 2 cups of chamomile. Not because I expected company, but because my table had missed the sound of someone listening. The knock on the door came around 3 p.m. Gentle. No rush. The kind of knock from someone who knows you might not want to talk, but hopes you do. I opened the door to find Lena standing there, wide-brimmed hat in hand, a small container of scones tucked beneath one arm. I thought we could sit, she said simply. So we did. No preface. No how are you. She just placed the scones down, took a sip from the cup I slid over and looked out at the garden. I followed her gaze. The lavender had started to bloom again, small violet bursts pushing through gray-green stems. Resilient, quiet things. I always loved how you take care of this yard, Lena said softly. It's like everything you grow knows it's safe here. That did something to me. Not a break, more like a knot inside my chest beginning to loosen. We sipped tea in silence for a while. I let the steam rise into my face, let the warmth fill the spaces left cold for too long. Then finally, I spoke. Ethan was here. Yesterday. She didn't react, just kept looking toward the garden. He saw the papers, I said. I didn't accuse anyone, didn't ask for anything back, just set the truth on the table. Lena reached for a scone, tore it in half. You always were brave in your own way. Brave. I smiled faintly. Is it brave to stop asking for a place in someone's life? She turned to me. No, she said. It's honest. That word. Honest. I let it sit in the space between us. After a long pause, she asked, Do you regret it? I thought for a while. Regret takes many shapes. It can wear your son's face, or echo through an empty voicemail, or taste like the frosting of a cake nobody cut. But right now, regret wasn't in the room. No, I said. I just wish he had looked at me the way he looked at her. Lena's eyes softened. You mean with hope? I nodded. We sat quietly again. Then she asked, Are you angry? I shook my head. No, I'm visible. She looked at me. That's all I ever wanted, Lena. Not apologies. Not payback. Just for someone to see that I was still here. That I hadn't disappeared the day I stopped being needed. She reached across the table, touched my hand lightly. Well, I see you, she said. We both looked out at the garden again. The wind shifted slightly, brushing past the blooms like a whisper. The lavender tilted gently, not fighting the breeze, just bending, adjusting, staying rooted. There was no speech to end the day, no promises made, only two older women sharing tea and the comfort of being witnessed. Sometimes that's all healing needs. Not a hero's ending, not even forgiveness. Just one quiet moment of being seen again. That Sunday morning, I wasn't expecting anything. The birds had already finished their breakfast. I had watered the garden early. The sun was gentle enough for a second cup of tea on the porch. Then I heard it. The soft ping from the phone I always kept on silent. I walked over expecting maybe a store coupon, a weather alert. But there it was, a message from Ethan. "Mom, if I came by every Sunday, would there be tea?" I stared at the screen, not because I didn't know how to answer, but because for the first time in a long time, he asked, not commanded, not assumed. He asked, "Would there be tea?" The part of me that had been frozen for years didn't jump for joy. It didn't shout or cry. It simply warmed, just a little. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, opened the tall cabinet where I kept the old tea set ivory porcelain with little forget-me-nots painted on the rim. The one we used when Ethan was little. The one he once broke the handle off and cried over for a week. I took it down gently, washed each piece, dried them one by one. Then I found a small bundle of lavender from the garden, tied it with a ribbon, placed it in the center of the table. No reply was needed. He'd know if he came. And if he didn't, well, I would still have tea. That afternoon, I baked scones. Not because I was certain he'd show up, but because hope, real hope, doesn't demand. It simply prepares. As the house filled with the scent of lemon and vanilla, I realized something. I wasn't doing this to win him back. I wasn't bargaining. I wasn't trying to earn a place again. I was simply honoring what mattered to me. And if he wished to sit at that table once more, he'd be welcome. But I would not shrink again. I wiped the table, set the cups, folded the napkins, poured water into the kettle but didn't turn it on. The house was quiet. Not empty, just quiet. And in that quiet, I let go of everything I had tried to control. Whether he came, whether he didn't, whether he meant it, whether it lasted. None of it was mine to manage anymore. But the tea would be ready. Because I chose to be ready for peace, for stillness, and maybe for beginnings that come a little late. That night, I didn't check my phone again. I sat by the window, watched the moonlight catch on the silver rim of the teapot, and for the first time in a long while, I felt full. Not because someone came back, but because I finally came back to myself. They thought I stayed quiet because I was weak, because I had nothing to say, because I didn't fight. But what they didn't know is that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. I was simply waiting for the moment when truth no longer needed to scream to be heard. And now, it's been heard. The file on the table, the lavender on the plate, the teacups placed for two, even when only one heart was steady. I've walked through this house 1,000 times over the years, each step worn into the floorboard by hope, each curtain drawn back in case someone remembered to look back, each dish cooked with recipes only mothers know how to pass down without ever writing them down. I don't regret a single one. People often ask, why didn't you tell Ethan about his diagnosis sooner? And maybe a part of me wonders the same. But I didn't, because I believed love is knowing when to hold pain for someone so they don't have to carry it too soon. Was I wrong? I don't know. All I know is I made that choice with love, not fear. And today I still choose love, not the kind that bends until it breaks, but the kind that stands quietly at the garden's edge, watering what others forgot, and letting the roots speak for themselves. You see, sometimes power doesn't come from being heard. It comes from knowing you don't need to be. There was a time I would have begged, would have asked why, would have tried to fix it all with one more casserole, one more cheerful voicemail, one more Sunday roast no one came for. But not anymore. Now I plant, I read, I pour tea for myself, and I listen not to the silence, but to the music behind it. Last night, I opened the old box where I'd once placed Ethan's medical record. I looked at it creased, yellowed edges, soft like petals, and I didn't cry. Instead, I folded it one last time. Not to hide it, not to bury it, but to honor that even pain deserves peace. And then I placed it in a new envelope, wrote, "Let this be light on the front," and slid it into the back of the photo album, not to erase anything, but to remember the truth was never a weapon. It was always a candle, and sometimes you light it, only when the house is dark enough. I don't know if Ethan will show up next Sunday, or the one after. I don't know if he'll ever look at me again with the eyes of a little boy who once ran to show me a painted rock and called it treasure. But I do know this: I will be here, with tea and lavender, and the kind of heart that doesn't need to be chosen, to remain open. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real strength is. Not the storm, but the shelter. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. We read every single one with gratitude. And if my story touched something in you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just for more stories like mine, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today, wherever you are in the world. I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care. We'll meet again in the next story.